At dawn on October 7th, 1571, the waters of the Gulf of Patras were almost still. To the west, near the mouth of the Gulf, the fleet of the Holy League moved slowly into line. Its oars rose and fell in rhythm, thousands of wooden blades touching the water at once. Banners hung in the morning air. Men stood crowded on the decks of long, narrow galleys, checking powder, match cords, crossbows, pikes, swords, and armour. Below them, rowers bent forward over their benches, waiting for the drums to quicken. Across the water, the Ottoman fleet was forming too. Its ships had come from Lepanto, from the eastern Mediterranean, and from a world that had grown used to victory at sea. The Ottoman Empire had taken cities, islands, ports, and coastlines. It had pushed across the Mediterranean with a confidence that frightened its enemies and impressed even those who hated it. Now two enormous fleets faced each other in a confined stretch of sea off western Greece. This was not a modern naval battle, fought at distance by machines. Lepanto would be fought by men packed onto wooden ships. Cannon would fire first. Muskets and arrows would follow. Then vessels would crash together, hooks would bite into rails, and soldiers would fight across decks that rolled under their feet. The men watching that morning did not know they were about to enter one of the largest and bloodiest naval battles of the 16th century. But they understood enough. They knew there would be no simple escape once the lines closed. The Christian fleet had already failed in one of its original purposes. It had not saved Cyprus. The island had fallen to the Ottomans. Famagusta, its last great Venetian stronghold, had surrendered after a brutal siege. The anger from that loss now travelled with the Holy League fleet. On the Ottoman side, the conquest of Cyprus had confirmed the empire's strength. The fleet standing off Lepanto was not there merely to defend itself. It was there to show that no Christian coalition could challenge Ottoman power in the eastern Mediterranean and survive. So the question that morning was larger than one battle. Could a divided Christian alliance hold together long enough to defeat the most feared naval power in the Mediterranean? Or would the Ottoman fleet break it apart before it ever became a real threat? Lepanto did not destroy the Ottoman Empire, but it shattered the belief that Ottoman sea power could not be beaten. To understand why that mattered, we have to step back from the morning of the battle and look at the crisis that brought these fleets into the same narrow sea. By the middle of the 16th century, the Mediterranean was not simply a body of water. It was a frontier between empires, religions, trading networks, and political ambitions. To the east, the Ottoman Empire had become the dominant power. Its armies held the Balkans. Its fleets moved through the eastern Mediterranean. Its ports and naval bases gave it reach from the Levant to North Africa. For many Europeans, Ottoman power felt like a pressure that kept moving west. To the west, Spain was the strongest Catholic monarchy in Europe. It ruled territories across the Mediterranean world and saw itself as a defender of Catholic power against Ottoman expansion. Venice was different. Venice was not an empire of vast inland territory. It was a maritime republic, rich from trade, dependent on sea routes, islands, ports, and careful diplomacy. Venice could fight, but it also had to trade. It had to survive between stronger powers. It could not afford to lose every war. It could not afford to offend every empire. But it also could not allow its eastern possessions to disappear without damaging the very foundation of Venetian power. Cyprus was one of those possessions. The island stood in the eastern Mediterranean, close to Ottoman territory, valuable for trade, and symbolically important to Venice. To the Ottomans, it was a Venetian outpost sitting too close to their sphere of control. To Venice, it was a piece of the Republic's maritime identity. In 1570, Sultan Selim II ordered the invasion of Cyprus. The Ottoman campaign moved with overwhelming force. Nicosia fell. Famagusta held out longer, becoming the centre of the Iron's final resistance. For Venice, the defence of Famagusta became more than a military matter. It became a test of honour and endurance. But Venice could not save Cyprus alone. Pope Pius V worked to create a Catholic coalition that could answer Ottoman power. This became the Holy League, a fragile alliance of Spain, Venice, the Papal States, Genoa, and other Italian powers. It looked strong on paper, but it carried deep tensions from the beginning. Spain had global commitments and did not always want to spend its strength on Venetian priorities. Venice wanted urgent action because its island was under attack. Genoa had its own commercial interests. The papacy wanted unity, but unity is easier to proclaim than to command. At the centre of this alliance stood Don John of Austria. He was young, ambitious, and carried the prestige of Spain. He was also the half-brother of King Philip II. That gave him status, but also pressure. A victory could make his name across Europe. A defeat could ruin the coalition and damage Spain's authority in the Mediterranean. Beside him were men with very different motives. Sebastiano Venier, the Venetian commander, represented a republic wounded by the loss of Cyprus. He was old, forceful, and angry. Marcantonio Colonna represented the papacy and the religious purpose of the League. Gianandrea Doria, the Genoese commander, was experienced and cautious, a man who understood that a single bad movement at sea could expose an entire wing. Opposing them was Muezzin Ali Pasha, the Ottoman commander, in the centre. He carried the confidence of an empire that had just taken Cyprus and expected its enemies to fear its fleet. With him was Ulush Ali, one of the most dangerous Ottoman commanders present, a man shaped by corsair warfare, maneuver, and opportunity. The Holy League hoped to relieve Cyprus, but the coalition moved too slowly. Famagusta fell before the Allied fleet could save it. The city's final defence became famous, and the harsh treatment of its Venetian commander, Marcantonio Bragadin, became a rallying cry. For Venice, the war now carried a powerful desire for revenge. For the papacy, it became a chance to frame the conflict as a great religious struggle. For Spain, it was a chance to contain Ottoman reach. The original mission had failed, but the fleet still existed. The Ottoman navy was still at sea, and the Holy League now had to decide whether to turn back or seek the decisive battle that might restore its honour. This is where Lepanto becomes more than a clash of ships. It becomes a story about a coalition that had already arrived too late, but trying to turn failure into victory before the entire alliance lost purpose. The place where this happened mattered. The battle was fought in the Gulf of Patras, near Lepanto, off western Greece. This was not the open Atlantic. This was Mediterranean water, where oared ships could manoeuvre, where shorelines could protect or trap a flank, and where wind mattered but did not control everything. Galleys could row even when sailing ships waited on air. A galley was long, low, and narrow. It was designed for speed under oars. Its power came from men pulling together, hour after hour, under discipline and exhaustion. In battle, these vessels did not simply exchange fire from a safe distance. They moved close, they grappled, their soldiers boarded one another. That made Lepanto a strange kind of battle. It was naval warfare, but it was also infantry warfare. Once ships locked together, the fight depended on soldiers standing on crowded decks, firing at close range, pushing forward, holding ground, and refusing to panic. The Holy League fleet probably had a little over 200 galleys, along with 6 Venetian galleasses. These galleasses were crucial. They were larger and heavier than ordinary galleys, with more guns and higher sides. They were not fast, they were not elegant, but placed correctly, they could act almost like floating artillery forts. The Ottoman fleet was larger in total vessels, though the exact numbers depend on how small a craft are counted. It may have had somewhere around 230 to nearly 280 vessels, including galleys and lighter ships. Ottoman strength lay in numbers, experience, speed, and commanders who knew how to exploit movement and disorder. The two fleets did not fight in exactly the same way. The Holy League relied heavily on gunpowder weapons, artillery, and disciplined infantry. Spanish soldiers, Venetian marines, Italian troops, and other fighters would matter once ships closed. The Ottomans relied on fast galley warfare, archers, janissaries, boarding troops, and the ability to stretch and turn an enemy line. The Christian commanders knew the danger. If the Ottoman wings could wrap around them, the battle could become a disaster. If the Holy League line broke, the coalition might not recover. Different squadrons from different states could begin fighting separate battles instead of one battle. That is why Don John's formation mattered so much. He placed his fleet in a wide line. The left wing stood near the shore. The centre, under Don John and the principal commanders, faced the Ottoman centre. The right wing, under Gianandrea Doria, watched the open water and the dangerous Ottoman left under Ulush Ali. A reserve waited behind, ready to move where the line began to fail. Ahead of the main line, the 6 Venetian galleasses were placed forward. This was one of the key decisions of the day. They were too slow to fight like ordinary galleys, but that was not their purpose. Their job was to break the Ottoman approach before the main collision. If the Ottoman fleet had to pass these gun-heavy ships under fire, its formation might loosen before boarding began. It was a calculated risk. If the Ottomans simply avoided them, the galleasses might be left behind. If they were isolated, they might contribute little. But if the timing worked, they could hurt the Ottoman line at the exact moment when order mattered most. Before the battle began, the human world inside the fleets was tense and cramped. Soldiers checked their weapons. Sailors looked at the rigging and the water. Officers watched the spacing between ships. Priests gave blessings. Men tried to read the faces of commanders. Rowers waited for the signal to pull harder, knowing that their bodies would drive the ships toward the enemy, but that they would have little control over what happened next. For many of them, battle at sea meant vulnerability. There was no hill to retreat behind, no forest to disappear into, no road leading away from the battlefield. Once ships locked, a man's world might shrink to a few yards of deck, smoke, noise, and the pressure of bodies pushing from behind. By late morning, the two fleets were moving into the fight. The Ottoman line advanced. The Holy League held its formation. The galleasses waited ahead like heavy obstacles placed in the path of a storm. Then the first guns began to fire. The opening phase of Lepanto was not a sudden chaotic collision. It was a slow, deliberate closing of distance. Across the Gulf of Patras, the Ottoman fleet moved forward in a broad line. Its oars beat the water. Its commander looked for weaknesses. On the opposite side, the Holy League ships tried to keep their spacing. Every gap mattered. Every drift of the line mattered. A fleet of galleys could look impressive from a distance, but inside that formation, control was fragile. On the Holy League left, the shoreline created both protection and danger. The coast could prevent an enemy from getting completely around the flank, but shallow waters and local knowledge could also let a skilled Ottoman commander try to squeeze through. In the centre, Don John and Ali Pasha faced each other. This was where the symbolic heart of the battle would form. Their flagships would draw men toward them like magnets. On the Holy League right, Gianandrea Doria watched Ulush Ali. This was a dangerous match. Doria was cautious because he understood what Ulush Ali might do. Ulush Ali was the kind of commander who looked for openings, and a battle line as large as this one could not remain perfect for long. The first major shock came from the Venetian galleasses. As the Ottoman fleet approached, it had to pass these heavy ships. The galleys opened fire. Cannon smoke rolled over the water. Ottoman galleys, built for speed and boarding, now had to move through artillery from vessels that were hard to board and difficult to silence quickly. This did not destroy the Ottoman fleet by itself. It is important not to turn the galleasses into a simple miracle weapon. Battles are rarely won by one device alone, but their effect was real. They disrupted momentum, they damaged ships, they forced changes in movement. They made the Ottoman advance less orderly before the main lines met. That mattered because in galley warfare, order was survival. A galley needed its oars working. It needed space to move. It needed its soldiers ready for the moment of contact. If it came into the collision already damaged or out of formation, the enemy could choose the terms of the fight. After the galleasses fired, the battle spread into several local struggles at once. Near the shore, the Ottoman, right under Sirotko, pressed against the Holy League left. This part of the battle was confused and hard fought. The coastline shaped every movement. Ottoman ships tried to work around the flank. Venetian ships tried to stop them before the line could be turned. For the men there, the battle would not have felt like a clean formation on a map. It would have felt like ships crowding too close, commands shouted across water, smoke hiding distances, and the constant fear that an enemy vessel might appear from the side. This was the first major danger for the Holy League. If the Ottoman right broke through near the shore, the Christian left could collapse inward. Once a flank failed, ships might suddenly find enemies attacking from the side or rear. A galley line could unravel quickly if men believed they were surrounded. The Holy League left fought to hold. At the same time, the centre was closing. Don John's flagship, the Real, moved toward Ali Pasha's flagship, the Sultana. Around them, the central squadrons came together. This was the part of the battle that later memory would focus on, and for good reason. In a battle of this kind, the command ships were more than vessels. They were symbols. Men looked toward them to understand whether the battle was being won or lost. The centre became a brutal boarding fight. Ships crashed together. Grappling hooks locked them side by side. Soldiers fired at close range. Musketeers and arquebusiers filled the air with smoke. Ottoman archers and gunmen answered. Pikes, swords, and boarding weapons came into play as men tried to force their way across narrow spaces of wood. This is where the Holy League's infantry advantage mattered. Spanish and Italian troops were trained for hard, close fighting. They were not simply sailors defending a ship. Many were professional soldiers, used to discipline under pressure. On the Ottoman side, Janissaries and Marines fought fiercely as well. The Ottoman centre did not simply fold. It had to be broken ship by ship, deck by deck. Near midday, the battle had become a collection of crises. On the left, the Holy League fought to prevent Ottoman movement along the shore. In the centre, Don John and Ali Pasha were locked in the decisive fight. On the right, the most dangerous Ottoman commander on the field was beginning to create a new problem. Gianandrea Doria saw Uluç Ali extending outward. Doria feared being outflanked. This was not an irrational fear. If Uluç Ali got around the Holy League right, he could roll up the line from the outside. So Doria moved his wing outward to match him. But that movement created a gap. This is one of the most important moments in the battle because it shows how a commander can make a reasonable decision and still create danger. Doria was trying to prevent one disaster. In doing so, he opened the possibility of another. Uluç Ali saw the space between the Holy League centre and right. He exploited it. Ottoman ships pushed into the opening and attacked isolated Christian vessels. For a time, this sector became a real crisis. The Holy League victory was not secure. Even as the centre fought hard, the right wing's movement threatened the unity of the line. This is the kind of moment that later summaries often flatten. They say the Holy League won, so the battle can sound inevitable. But it was not inevitable to the men inside it. There were points during Lepanto when local failure could have spread. A few ships lost in the wrong place could create panic. A visible collapse on one wing could change what men in the centre believed about their chances. As the afternoon wore on, the pressure in the centre grew. The fight around the two flagships became more intense. Don John's men pushed toward Ali Pasha's vessel. Reinforcements came in. Nearby ships added pressure. The Ottoman flagship became increasingly isolated in the chaos. Ali Pasha's ship was boarded. Once the fighting reached that point, the battle turned from command into survival. The Ottoman commander's flagship had to hold not only as a ship but as a symbol. If it remained standing, the Ottoman centre could still believe it had not broken. If it fell, the message would travel faster than any formal order. Ali Pasha was killed, and his flagship was captured. For the Holy League, this was the central turning point. The fall of the Ottoman commander did not instantly end every fight across the Gulf. Ulush Ali was still dangerous. Ottoman ships were still fighting. But the psychological effect was enormous. In a battle fought at close range, where men could see banners, hear shouts, and watch command ships rise or fall, symbols mattered. The Ottoman centre began to lose cohesion. Some ships kept fighting. Others were captured. Some tried to pull away. The line that had advanced with confidence in the morning now faced the reality that its centre had been broken. For the Holy League, this was the moment when fear began to turn into belief. The reserve and nearby squadrons helped contain the remaining crises. Ulush Ali had achieved success against part of the Christian line, but he could not turn that success into victory for the whole Ottoman fleet. With the centre failing and the battle turning against him, he withdrew with part of his force. His escape is important. It reminds us that Lepanto was not a total erasure of Ottoman naval power. One of the best Ottoman commanders survived. Part of the fleet escaped. The empire still had shipyards, resources, and administrative strength. The battle was catastrophic, but it was not the end of the Ottoman Empire at sea. Still, by the time the smoke began to thin, the result was clear. The Holy League had won. The sea around Lepanto was filled with the remains of a battle fought at a scale few men had ever witnessed. Ships drifted damaged or captured. Oars floated loose in the water. Banners hung torn or fallen. Men who had spent the morning in formation now stood exhausted among wreckage, prisoners and survivors. Thousands were dead. Thousands more were captured. Many Christian rowers who had been enslaved on Ottoman ships were freed. For those men, the victory was not an abstract political event. It was the moment when the chains and benches that had defined their lives were suddenly broken open. The Holy League had taken or destroyed a large part of the Ottoman fleet. The exact numbers vary depending on the source, and early modern accounts often inflated victories or simplified losses. But there is no serious doubt that the Ottoman defeat was severe. Ali Pasha was dead. His flagship had fallen. Don John of Austria became a celebrated hero across Catholic Europe. Venice had gained revenge for Cyprus, even though it had not recovered the island. Pope Pius V could present the battle as a great victory for the Holy League and for Catholic unity. But victory brought its own problem. What did it actually change? Immediately after the battle, the answer seemed obvious to many in Europe. Lepanto looked like proof that Ottoman power could be stopped. It gave Catholic Europe a story it badly wanted, that unity, faith, discipline, and courage had broken the feared Ottoman fleet. Celebrations followed. Songs, paintings, prayers, and official accounts turned the battle into a symbol. In Christian memory, Lepanto became more than a military victory. It became a moment of deliverance. The Ottomans had to tell a different story. They could not deny the defeat, but they could limit its meaning. Their empire was not destroyed. Their armies still held vast territories. Their shipyards could rebuild. Ulush Ali survived, and his continued role helped show that Ottoman naval strength had not vanished completely. This is where the story becomes more complicated than the title alone might suggest. Lepanto broke Ottoman sea power in the sense that it broke the fear surrounding it. It shattered the assumption that the Ottoman fleet could not be beaten in a major open battle. But it did not remove the Ottoman Empire from the Mediterranean. It did not restore Cyprus to Venice. It did not create a permanent Christians alliance. In fact, the Holy League struggled to turn victory into lasting strategic success. Coalitions are often strongest on the day of battle and weaker in the months that follow. Spain, Venice, the papacy, and Genoa did not all want the same future. Venice needed trade and survival. Spain had other wars and other priorities. The papacy could bless a war, but it could not erase the political interests of its allies. A few years later, Venice accepted peace with the Ottomans and recognized the loss of Cyprus. That fact can feel surprising after a victory as famous as Lepanto, but it teaches one of the clearest lessons of the battle. Winning a battlefield does not automatically win a war. Lepanto changed morale more than borders. It told Europe that the Ottoman fleet could be defeated. It gave Spain and the papacy a powerful symbol. It gave Venice revenge, though not restoration. It marked one of the last great moments of galley warfare, when thousands of men still decided the fate of fleets by rowing, boarding, and fighting at close quarters on wooden decks. It also showed the growing importance of gunpowder firepower at sea. The Venetian galleasses did not win alone, but they demonstrated how heavy guns could disrupt traditional galley tactics before the lines even met. The future of naval warfare would move farther towards sailing ships and broadside artillery, but Lepanto still belonged to an older world, where oars, soldiers, and commanders standing in view of their men could decide the day. For modern viewers, the battle matters because it refuses to fit into a simple category. It was a stunning victory, but not a complete strategic triumph. It broke a myth, but not an empire. It proved the power of coalition warfare, but also exposed its limits. It showed how technology can shape a battle, but also how morale and leadership still matter when men are fighting face to face. And it reminds us that history is often decided not only by what happens, but by what people believe happened. At dawn on October 7, 1571, the men in the Gulf of Patras saw two fleets preparing for battle. By evening, they had seen one of the greatest naval clashes of their age. The Ottoman fleet had been beaten. The Holy League had survived. The Mediterranean had not changed hands in a single afternoon, but something in the imagination of Europe had shifted. The sea power that had seemed unstoppable had been stopped. Not forever, not completely, but visibly, violently, and in front of thousands of witnesses. Centuries later, the image that remains is not a clean map line or a permanent conquest. It is a smoky sea at sunset, broken oars drifting between shattered galleys, and thousands of men realizing that the most feared fleet in the Mediterranean could bleed, break, and retreat. And if this story helps you see Lepanto not just as a famous battle, but as a complicated turning point, then the next chapter of Mediterranean history becomes even more interesting.